Hello and welcome back to our Bible study this week. We're continuing on with the book of Isaiah, looking at Isaiah chapter 46. We're using the Common English Bible for our study, but you're invited to use whatever version of the Bible you have in front of you. My name is Reverend David Matthews, and I'm here with the Reverend Nancy Springer. We're friends from seminary, and it's just a wonderful opportunity that we have to be able to continue to examine and study the scripture. So we're very glad you're able to join us today. So, Nancy, would you be willing to start us off with Isaiah chapter 46, verse 1?
All right, I sure will. Bel crouches down, Nebo cowers. Their idols sit on animals, on beasts. The objects you once carried about are now borne as burdens by the weary animals. They crouch down and cower together. They aren't able to rescue the burden, but they themselves go into captivity. Listen to me, house of Jacob, all that remains from the house of Israel, who have been born by me since pregnancy, whom I carried from the womb. Until you grow old, I am the one, and until you turn gray, I will support you. I have done it, and I will continue to bear it. I will support, and I will rescue. To whom will you liken me and count me equal and compare me so that we are alike? Those who pour out gold from a bag and weigh silver with a balance hire a metal worker, then he makes a god. They bow down, they worship. They carry the idol on their shoulders and support it. They set it down, and it stands still, unable to move from its place. If one cries out to it, it doesn't answer. It can't save people from their distress.
Remember this and take courage. Take it to heart, you rebels. Remember the prior things from long ago. I am God, and there's no other. I am God, there's none like me. Who tells the end at the beginning? From ancient times, things not yet done, saying, my plan will stand. All that I decide, I will do. I call a bird of prey from the east, a man from a distant land for my plan. As surely as I have spoken, I'll make it happen. I have planned, and yes, I'll do it. Listen to me, you bullheaded people who are far from victory. I'm bringing my victory near. It isn't far, and my salvation, it won't delay. I will establish salvation in Zion and grant my splendor to Israel. The word of the Lord.
Thanks be to God.
So, Nancy, to start us off, who is Bel and who's Nebo? What's going on?
Well, Bel is the main Babylonian deity, and Nebo is his son. And so they're just naming two of the Babylonian gods here that are carved into idols that apparently even the Israelites carried about.
All right. So similar to the pantheon of like Greek gods where Zeus has a number of kids. That's what we're looking at here with Bel and Nebo.
Right. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
So when we first come into this, where we have been talking about idols for a while, what's then significant about this chapter?
Well, this chapter kind of bookends this idol conversation we've been having on and off again for the last, what we call 6 chapters, remembering that in the original, these chapter markings would not have been there. It would have just been one continuous story. But it emphasizes the problem that idols were for the Israelites, right? They were surrounded by all of these cultures and people who had multiple gods, lower G gods, right? And they created statues and carvings of these gods to give them something physical to worship and to help define their life. And from the very beginning, God had said to the Israelites, you will have no other God before me. You will make no images. We don't know what God looks like. We are created in God's image versus being able to create a God in whatever image we choose. And so this was a real issue between God and his people, a real stumbling block for them. And so the fact that so much of these last 6 chapters have been God pointing out how useless these idols are, and that they are simply creations of humans, and that God is the creator of humans, and that there is no one like him. So this has been a lengthy conversation of God just trying to make the point that God is God and we are not, and we are created in God's image and cannot create a God in our own.
Yeah, and in this chapter specifically, we recognize that difference, because to a god to a people in that time was the source of life, the source of power. And the Israelites understood that and recognized that themselves. And Bel and Nebo were the source of the Babylonian power and life. And so the people would perhaps turn their hearts to these other gods when they look at these other nations around them being more powerful than them, and thinking, oh, I want to be just as prosperous as my next door neighbor over there, and he worships Bel and he's richer than I am, so maybe Bel can give me more than my God's giving me, so I'll worship Bel as well, or maybe instead of the God that I worship. And so to do that, I need to set up my little altar and my little figurine. And yet it's interesting because here we see the Israelites going into captivity, and it's talking about these idols being dragged off. They're spoils of this captivity, of this war, because the idols were often inlaid with gold or made out of precious materials. So obviously the invading army wants that material, wants that thing, so they take them. And it's interesting in this moment, though, that as they're being carted off, the prophet Isaiah here is saying, yeah, where were your gods? They weren't saving you. And now even those statues are actually a burden to the animals that are carrying them. They're being weighed down. So instead of that God or that statue giving you life and giving you power, saving you, it's actually even now a burden to that animal too. And as it was a burden to you. And so that's a very interesting point, that the Israelites were making these idols, and it was costing them the resources. It was a burden to them instead of them turning their hearts and their lives over to God. So that's again a stark contrast here between the idolatry versus the living righteously after God, and how that was shown in people's lives.
Yeah, it is. God makes that point in verse 4, right? That God will continue to bear us as burdens, but he will continue to bear us up in our struggles, and God will support, and God will be the one who rescues. Because the idol gods, Bel and Nebo, were captured along with the people, right? They didn't free the people or prevent the captivity. They were captured right along with them.
Yeah, and some might say that, well, hold on, well, that, if the Israelite people are captured, doesn't that just mean the Israelite God is being captured too? It's the same thing. To which the prophet is responding, no, because the Israelite people are going to cry out. So wait, basically he's saying, wait till the end of the story, because God's allowing this to happen for a purpose. So hold on, and you'll see that purpose be come to its fulfillment. You'll see the God of Israel as more powerful than the Babylonian God, because he will restore.
Right. And the second half of verse 7, right? And it's the use of the pronoun it, that impersonal pronoun of an inanimate object. It's God says, if one cries out to it, it doesn't answer. It referring to the statue of Bel. It can't save people from their distress. And this echoes all of the times through Israel's history where they cried out to God, and God heard them, and God rescued, and God saved them. And so they would have heard this sentence, or these two sentences, very personally, and remember their stories of the one God and who they are as God's people.
I heard a Jewish commentator once describe what it was to be Jewish, and he said, "You get into trouble, you cry out to God, God saves you, you have a party, and you eat a lot of food, and that's what it is to be Jewish."
And then you get into trouble again.
Yes, yes. Oh, yeah. I think that was sort of just in there
It's
as
the
the
circle.
understanding of
Yeah,
the whole thing. But
right.
because each of the times, of course, God saves the people, they seem to mark it with the feast day. And this is
Yes,
the
of course.
time, and they're told to remember it and have the feast and keep the feast. And
And
that's
tell
what it
their
is.
children and their children's children of this feast and why they had it. Yeah.
Absolutely.
The way
And
they would have
again and
that.
again, it's that point of creating a remembrance, just like we have in North America. We celebrate Remembrance Day or Veterans Day. We mark these days in our calendars, whether it is again American Independence Day or Canada Day. But again, we have these times nationally we mark or plot in order to help define us as a culture, as a people. And that's what the
Right.
Jewish people had the same thing. Theirs just was much more closely tied to their religion and faith than some of ours have become in our cultures.
Right. Yeah. And so it's that remembering that we are called to, that God calls the people to, beginning in verse 8, right? So remember your history, remember who you are, remember where you came from, um, and remember that I am your God and you are my people. Um, and so it's that remembrance that connects us to our past as we continue to move forward in history, right?
Mhm.
It doesn't stop our movement because God keeps calling us forward, um, furthering God's purpose and God's plan on earth as it is in heaven. And that's, he started that with the Israelites and all of the things he led them through.
And I would emphasize that as an important point, Nancy, that God is the source and the life, right? For any culture, the God that they believe is the source of life and goodness.
Yeah,
And we believe, and anybody believes that their God should ultimately be bringing them together and towards a specific end. And the end we believe in is God's kingdom here on earth as it is in heaven. And I think any other culture would believe or hope for the same thing. So really what marks us differently and what marks each apart is actually the identity of their God. And which
yeah,
which kingdom would you rather be on earth as it is in their heaven? So you have to look at the character of the God. And as I look at the character of our God, that we put our faith and our hope and belief in, the God who saves, the God who rescues and redeems, that's the only God that I would actually want their kingdom to truly be here.
yeah,
Because every other God, every other their character, their kingdom that they're putting forward, I don't want that. That's not the world that I would want to live in.
yeah, yeah. That the the idol gods who treat humans as pawns and chess pieces for their own benefit, right? And not God's, like the God, our God, the God of Israel, who seeks to be in relationship with us and wants us to thrive and flourish as his children. We are not pieces to his own warped game,
Oh,
as
and
God
even
is
in
portrayed.
even in modern culture, looking at the depictions of the gods of, well, whether it be Islam or the Hindu gods, I look at them and I say there isn't one amongst them that what they espouse I would want to live within.
Mhm.
Um, just looking at the Islamic understanding of Allah, for instance, one of their big hesitancies towards Christianity and the gospel message is the idea of God becoming incarnate, God actually stepping down from his throne to be amongst the people. And so it is a very it leans very strongly on the sovereignty of God, but it removes from it the sense that God would actually come to us. And that is something
Right.
incredibly beautiful about our faith, is that God is God, absolutely. But God is the God who's willing to come down, to actually stoop down to be with us. And that is the God whose kingdom I want to be in. God is still perfect, God is still beautiful, but God's willing to come to you, to rescue you, to be with you. And that is the God who's in love with his people. And that is, in my understanding, the only God that I could imagine actually serving and loving, because it's not a God who casts off, it's a God who calls, who draws you close.
Right. Yeah.
So,
Well said.
Nancy, what more have we missed? Is there anything else that you can touch on? We had talked briefly earlier about the bullheaded people comment.
Well, yeah, God just says it like it is. And in verse 12, right? Listen to me, you bullheaded people who are far from victory, right? God has said to them over and over and over again, when you follow me, I will be your victory, right? I will bring you to where I am calling you to be, to the land and the place, and to be the people. And they just keep trying over and over again to do it on their own and try a different way. And so, yeah, listen to me, you bullheaded people who are far from victory. God says, my victory is very near, right? My salvation is coming. It won't delay. And so just one more reminder to them. And yet, God knows they're still going to keep being bullheaded as we are to this day. And that's so amazing, is that regardless of how many times we break the covenant with God, God stays faithful to us, and God comes to us, inviting us to return over and over and over again.
Well, that's wonderful. Thank you. There's nothing more that I have specifically that I want to emphasize. So
I think that's it. Yeah, that was a pretty good chapter. Well, as we move on through the rest of Isaiah, we'll start hearing more about where they are as a people and in their exile, and the struggles of that, as God promises to be with them and turn it all around for them in some day. So we just keep marching through Isaiah. It's an awesome story. It is very long, and we so appreciate everybody just being with us through this long journey of this one particular scroll of the prophet Isaiah.
Yep. All right. Well, God bless everyone. Have a wonderful week, and we'll look forward to seeing you again next time. Take care and God bless.
Bye.